Friends, welcome. It is absolutely glorious to see this large, enthusiastic crowd. My name is Taylor Reevely. I'm the president of William & Mary. Welcome to William & Mary, in particular to our education school. I think the work done in this building does speak powerfully to the good that education can and does do for society. Dean Virginia McLaughlin, who has led William & Mary's education school brilliantly for many, many years, is with us today. Jenny, wave. And of course, it's marvelous to have Secretary Arne Duncan in our midst to lead today's conversation. He has with him on the panel Undersecretary Martha Cantor. Others who will join in today's conversation are, in ruthless, I hope, alphabetical order. And please raise your hands at the magic moment. President Carlos Campo of Regent University, John Deaver. We can applaud at the end. John Deaver of Thomas Nelson Community College. Chancellor Glenn Dubois of the Virginia Community College System. President Keith Miller of Virginia State University, President Debbie Saido. If your name is Taylor Reevely, you are very sensitive to the pronunciation of names, though I have learned to respond to anything. Of Richard Bland, and Provost Carol Simpson of Old Dominion University. Now, I got the podium for the moment in my clutches. It's a big panel. So before I sit down, I've got a few quick contextual thoughts. First, it really is a no-brainer that effective higher education benefits society. Well-educated citizens grow the economy and contribute to civic and cultural life. They are less likely to end up in jail. And if they get married, they are more likely to stay married. They usually pay taxes, often a lot of taxes. Effective higher education is good for the body politic. Second, effective education is also great for the person who experiences it, because advanced learning does materially increase the likelihood of a successful, meaningful, satisfying future. So effective higher education is both a public good and a private good. Thus, it is appropriately funded from both public and private sources. Third, of course, higher education is not effective when a student learns little, doesn't graduate or takes an ice age to graduate, gets stuck with a lot of debt in the process, isn't able to land a serious job, or for that matter, to handle a serious job. And higher education, as we all know, is under intense scrutiny these days to see whether it is effectively delivering the goods. That's fair. That's fair. It's also important, however, that this scrutiny get the facts straight, avoid damning all schools for the sins of a few, and not grind advocacy axes at the cost of objectivity. Fourth, it's vitally important that higher education stay affordable for those who want it and can handle it. This does not mean that students from families with the means to pay should be subsidized through tuition rates that don't come close covering the costs of the education provided. It does mean that students and families of limited or really no means should receive need-based financial aid. I don't see any realistic way of ensuring affordability without powerful programs of need-based aid delivered through a combination of scholarships, work study, and loan. Fifth, serious talk about affordability sometimes turns into apocalyptic visions of student debt rampaging across the countryside, devouring all in its path, laying waste. Yes, there is a huge amount of student debt in this country in the aggregate. And some of it has been incurred with little or nothing gained in return. But as with all aspects of American higher education, one size does not fit all when talking about student debt. The enormously effective undergraduate education at William & Mary, for example, is not accompanied by rapacious student debt. Almost 60% of our undergraduates leave William & Mary with a degree on time and no debt. Of the others, the average debt after 4 years in college is $20,835, which is well below the average amount borrowed in this country to buy a new car. And the default rate of those William & Mary graduates who do have student debt is 0.6%. 0.6%, one of the very lowest in the country. 6, another no-brainer about higher education is that those of us in higher education must start doing a much, much, much better job of controlling our costs. This will require significant productivity gains on both the administrative and the academic side of campuses. Those of us in higher education have simply got to develop innovative ways to reduce costs while preserving, ideally enhancing, the caliber of learning on our campuses. This is not going to be easy at all, but it is essential. 7th, any way you chew it, the most effective higher education is expensive, especially when it involves a professor dealing directly with a student, live human being to live human being, in class and out of class. If we want higher education of genuine quality, it has to be paid for. There is absolutely no free lunch. One last thought. In my opinion, it is very, very unlikely that most states are going to be able to pump a lot of money back into public higher education in the foreseeable future, given all the other demands on state revenues. Just think about them. Exploding health care costs, grossly underfunded retirement obligations, inadequate and decaying infrastructure, the enormous demands of K-12 education. The list goes on and on and on. There will not be enough state revenue to deal effectively with everything. Nor, I fear, is it likely that the federal government is going to have the resources to support higher education as it has traditionally done since the Second World War. We really are moving into a long period of financial constraints, more severe than any of us in this room have ever experienced. So if we're going to preserve wonderful state systems of public higher education, this will require, in my judgment, getting real about what effective higher education costs, looking with an equally realistic eye at how much taxpayer support is likely to be available, and agreeing to channel the taxpayer support that is available disproportionately to the schools with the least capacity to fend for themselves financially, while allowing those schools with the greatest capacity to fend for themselves financially to go ahead and do it, to have the freedom to sustain themselves through robust public-private partnerships. Secretary Duncan, it is grand to have you with us today. We are yours.
I think you have, this is, you know.
I forgot I was wired, so thank you so much, President Reeve. Martha and I are thrilled to be here. I'll be very, very quick. We want to get into a great conversation with all the leaders here and then hear from all of you and ask all the hard questions to these guys and ask me and Martha all the easy ones, and we'll have a good day. I think the President laid out the real, very real challenges we're facing. And just to add a little more context to it, one generation ago we led the world in college graduation rates, and today we're 16th. 15 countries have passed us by. And I'm just convinced we're not going to have a strong country and a strong economy if we don't again lead the world in college graduation rates. So the President has challenged us to get to that point by 2020. We have to do it at a time of declining enrollment, at a time of great fiscal pressures. So this is much easier said than done. It's an ambitious goal, it's achievable, but we have to increase those graduation rates at a much faster rate than we have historically. All of us have a role to play. We in the federal level have to continue to invest. I was thrilled. One of the things I'm most proud of is we were able to get an additional $40 billion for Pell Grants over the next decade without going back to taxpayers for a nickel. We simply stopped subsidizing banks, put all that money into young people. That was wildly controversial in Washington. We thought it was common sense, and we're thrilled to get that done. And just in the past 2 years, we've gone from 6 million Pell recipients to close to 10 million, so almost more than a 50% increase. So a lot more folks coming from not a lot of money are now going to college, and we think that's a huge step in the right direction. Thanks in part to the support of many of you, last Friday the President signed a bill that helps keep Stafford interest rates where they are so that costs don't continue to increase. That was a very important step in the right direction, but that's just one piece in the puzzle. I worry a lot about not just families from disadvantaged communities, but many, many middle-class families are starting to think that college isn't for them. It's for wealthy folks. It's for rich folks not like them. And that's a real challenge. We think everybody who works hard should have an opportunity to go to higher education. That's where the jobs of the future are going to be. The jobs aren't there for high school dropouts. They're not there if you just have a high school diploma. I was in Iowa recently talking to a group of high school students in a pretty middle-class area. Happened to talk to a young girl who's a senior. She has a twin brother, and her parents, she said, are right now trying to decide which twin to send to college, she, her brother. And that's the real dinnertime conversation that's happening around the country, and that's absolutely unacceptable to me. So we want to, at the federal level, to play a role to continue to invest, and we think it's absolutely the best investment we can make as a country. Universities have to keep costs down, as the President talked about that, and be creative in other ways, build cultures not just around access, but around completion, and do those without a lot of resources. And I also want to challenge states to continue to invest, and I agree that states have many other fiscal pressures. But again, if states want to have the best educated workforce in their states, they have to contribute. I'm leaving here to go meet with the National Governors Association. Last year, 40 states, 80% of the country, cut funding to higher education. That's not a good thing. And then finally, we want to continue to empower parents and students to make good choices. And we have 6,000 institutions of higher education, 2-year, 4-year, public, private, nonprofit. And we want folks to go to places where you'll get a great education, where you'll get value for your investment, but where you're making an educated choice. And we think it's been far too hard to figure out what's the best learning environment for you. So we're trying to push a lot around transparency as well. So this is about shared responsibility. It's about all of us stepping up and trying to be part of the solution. And again, we're not just fighting for education here. I really think we're fighting for our country. And if we continue to be 16th in the world or drop, I worry a lot about how strong we're going to be economically. If we begin to become first in the world in college graduation rates, I think we're going to be in great, great shape as a country. And just appreciate the collective leadership here amongst the panel. We've got some pretty extraordinary leaders here. Look forward to hearing their comments and what we can all be doing better. Please challenge Martha and I what we're doing right, but more importantly, what we're doing wrong or how we can be a better partner. And then I look forward to all of your questions as well. And I'd like to turn it over to Martha.
Sure. I would just make a few comments. When I think about the future, having been a teacher for, gosh, over 30 years, probably 40 now, I always thought to myself, what would it take to educate the top 100% of students in my classes, not just some? And so coming to this job 3 years ago, I thought to myself, what is it going to take to educate the top 100 students in this nation who want the opportunity to go to college, to come to William and Mary, to go to a community college, to come to a historically black college and university? What will it take to make sure that our entire nation lifts up its education level? So when Secretary Duncan talks about being 16th in the world, and I look back over my history, my short 60+ years, and think we were first in the world a generation ago, we have got to do better as a nation. Now, the good news is you see colleges and universities up here from all sectors, from 4-year to 2-year to public to private. And you see all of these colleges and universities really working on increasing productivity, using every leverage of innovation that they possibly can to get more and more students persisting and graduating. So when Secretary Duncan and President Obama talk about shared responsibility, we talk about the fact that students have to do more. We want students to persist. We want students to push through. We want students to study 3 hours every hour that they're in the content. They should be studying 3 or 4 hours to really understand what it is that the professors need them to learn. That isn't happening across the board in this country. So we have to restart the engagement of students in the academic profile of why these colleges and universities do what they do. But we also have to play a role at the states. We can't have, more than 2/3 of states cutting budgets year after year. Everybody's shrinking in, staffing, public and part-time and full-time, and trying to make ends meet. But we've got to have a stable, predictable financial investment in public higher education, in K-12, and in early learning. We have 1/3 of children that aren't ready for kindergarten. What's that going to mean for the next generation? So when we think about these ideas, we come to higher education asking for your thought leadership, your innovation, the way that you can help us do more with less, and when we have other revenues like we were able to get with the Pell Grant, help us educate more students. So I'll just close with one very exciting thought that I shared with the president here on my left, that in 2009 we had 6 million students who received a Pell Grant. These are students from the lowest income sectors of the country, and today we have over 9.6 million in our colleges and universities represented here. That's more than a 50% increase in students that didn't have the economic means as the wealthier students. Now, if we can increase that by 50% in a couple years, imagine what we could do in the foreseeable future. So the idea of really lifting this country and educating that top 100% is really the challenge today. And I want to thank all of you for being here with us on the podium, and look forward to your tough questions and the questions in the audience, and do everything that we all can do together to get this challenge met. Thank you.
I guess we'd just love to open it up to the presidents. We can start any place and hear what's working, what's not, and again, whatever challenges you have for Martha and I to be thinking about to be a better partner. I'd love to hear that as well. Maybe let's go, jump in.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary and Madam Undersecretary, for getting on the train to come out here. We're delighted that you're here. I'm the Chancellor of the Virginia Community College System. I've been in the business for 31 years. I'm also a community college graduate. You have really put the spotlight, this administration, on the role, and more importantly, the potential larger role for community colleges to play on the access agenda. The President has visited Northern Virginia at least 5 times, and I think if he comes anymore, I think I have to issue him some college credit. Here in Virginia, Mr. Secretary, just so you leave knowing, we have established among the university presidents and the community college presidents these guaranteed transfer opportunities where we can say to any family that their son or daughter can graduate William & Mary, UVA, or Virginia Tech if they enroll and graduate a community college in Virginia or Richard Bland at a prescribed GPA. So I guess I would recommend that there could be a larger federal role, perhaps through some formula grants of some kind to promote a larger role for community colleges, particularly in the pursuit of the baccalaureate. It is a legitimate way to lower the cost of higher education. We are 1/3 the price on average of the Virginia public universities, and just about everything, and in many cases, everything that you do is fully portable to the university. So thank you for putting a spotlight on community colleges. And keep it up, but I think we can play even a larger role in generating the access and lowering the cost.
Yeah, I'd just say that I think the opportunity for the community colleges to build on those agreements with the universities is enormous, but I think the big challenge is to bring the private sector in, to bring business, also the public sector, bring government in. So students, students today are not the students that I worked with 40 years ago when I went to college. Students today, the majority of them, have to work full or part-time to make ends meet. And I don't think as a country we've really understood that in higher education. It's great if you have the money and you can afford not to work. But when I go out and talk to undergraduate programs, public, private, community college, for-profit, you name it, you ask how many students are working while they go to college. Pretty much more than 2/3, 3/4 raise their hand, in most cases, all of them. Now we know from the research, you should only work 10 to 15, maximum 20 hours a week. We have some working full-time, taking courses, maybe even at more than one school because they're making ends meet. They may come, finish at a community college, be at William and Mary, and move ahead. So I think, we need to challenge the public and private sectors to help us really craft those longer-term sustainable relations so students can expect a good job, they're not going to have to work their tails off, they can study more hours and go to school and succeed and be retained and persist and graduate. That's the big challenge. Students are dropping out because of financial means, because they just can't make the whole package work. And so, kudos to you for having the articulation agreement. I think we need to do a lot more with the business community and government.
I would like to echo that. I think you've hit the nail on the head. At Old Dominion University, where 30% of our students are Pell eligible. And our completion rate, sadly, is not the same as William and Mary's because our students are working, and they are working, many of them, full-time, and it's almost impossible for them to keep on track. So many of our students drop to part-time. At the same time, we do have very strong relationships with the community college systems. We work with 2+2 programs. We really do align the students to ensure that they're successful. We're actually working closely now with Thomas Nelson Community College to make sure that when the students transfer in, they're on a good track and can move forward. But if there's a way that we could get the business community and industry to really help the students, more internships perhaps, paid internships, I mean, not the unpaid ones that are always there. Not only does that give not only does that give the student the experience and the job experience and the professional experience, but it also helps them to get through that much faster. So I think you're exactly on the right track. Thank you for taking that approach.
Mr. Secretary, Madam Undersecretary, thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. At many of our institutions, we certainly we want to create the best engineers, the best computer scientists. The skill level is second to none at many of our universities for the various disciplines and majors. However, in addition to that, many of us pay close attention to creating good citizens. We pay close attention to getting students engaged in their communities, social responsibility, voting, and various things like that. Have a broad-based liberal arts education, and many administrators and faculty members feel that that is very, very important for our citizenry. I was wondering if you had thoughts about that, or if you'd share your experience with that notion.
Go ahead. Well, I'll just talk about, we just spent a year-long study. We commissioned scholars from across the country, 125 scholars from these universities and others across the country, to talk about what is our democracy going to look like going forward, not only for this generation, but for the next and the next. When you ask a high school class, how many of you know where Georgia is? It's shocking that only 30% can point to Georgia on a map. So we need to do a lot of work. That's just one of many examples. Supreme Court, you can ask the question of what students know in elementary, middle school, and high school. So the Crucible Moment was published in January. It was announced at the White House. It's an open study, so you can take a look at it on the internet. And you can see at the end of that document recommendations which really promote back to the social responsibility, but also the shared responsibility that Secretary Duncan talked about. So it tells business, if we want to have a society in which our democracy is really restored and we all share the fundamental values of the democracy, what should business do? What should education do, K-12, higher education? What should philanthropy do? What should states do? What should the federal government do? And so that caused us to then spend the next few months actually producing another report that's also available called the Roadmap to Civic Learning and Democracy's Future. And there we have 9 recommendations that we're following up on. I'll just touch on one and then turn this over to the Secretary. One is, how do we know about the civic health of our communities? Well, can we encourage communities to look at civic indicators? Do we have students, for example, choosing public service majors? You know, the President put in place public service loan forgiveness. You get a loan, you want to become a teacher, you want to go to the graduate school here of education, and you would have to take a loan because you didn't have all the means. You pay it back in 10 years, it's forgiven. The rest of it is forgiven. That's one example of trying to encourage students to go into the public sector jobs that may not be as lucrative as other private sector, sector jobs. So there are lots of recommendations in there. We're going to be publishing information about our civic health as a society, and would welcome your comments about that, because it really is fundamentally important that students who graduate understand they're part of the democracy. And this is what the democracy means, and this is what we need to do for its future.
Just a couple quick things to add. I think it's such an important point. We want the content knowledge. We want people engaged in the civic life, in our democracy. And this is largely a higher ed crowd, and I think when we survey freshmen about how much they want to be engaged and want to participate, those rates actually go down by the time they're a senior. So something happens during those couple years of college that turns some folks away or don't provide the opportunities. So that's the challenge of this crowd, of how do we get those senior numbers even higher than when they came in the front door. But it's not just a higher ed challenge. I'd go back, high school, middle school, even elementary school. If we want to reduce dropout rates, if we want students engaged in math and science and social studies, the best thing I can think we can do is get them actively engaged in their communities. And particularly in disadvantaged communities, having young people start to see their power and their efficacy and their ability to make a difference at a young age, I think is a hugely empowering part of their development. So it is definitely a challenge to the higher ed community, but it's not unique here. And the more those opportunities become the norm, at 8 and 9 and 10 years old and all the way up, I think the better our students will do academically, and the more they'll be engaged in the civic life of their communities in the country. Thank you.
Well, I want to join the chorus in thanking you for coming and for this conversation. Thanks for your hosting as well, President Reevely. Just a couple of quick comments and questions. One, coming from a background in the community college system and now being in private higher ed, I've seen both of those sides and know the challenges in both, and they are dramatic. Appreciate this emphasis on access. I'm going to repeat things, of course, that you know better than I, but this idea that in the next 10 years, the demographic of students, the growing demographic of Latino students in particular, 49% increase, 25% among African Americans, but especially among males, these folks just have dropped out of higher ed, and as you point out, even before. So incentivizing and making higher ed an expectation, and identify and doing that in ways that really impact them where they are. I think we've all seen a recent ad that I thought was stunning. I don't know if the audience has seen. Have you seen this commercial where someone's laying in bed and the ad says, "Get out of bed," and he literally falls through the mattress, and basically he realizes in time that if you stay in bed, you will live on the streets, or that there's a direct line of thought there. I thought that was a stunning way for us to start getting at a critical piece there. And I think this whole idea of taking higher ed and education to the streets, I think, is that one of those things when we talk about a recommendation. If we were set up in the middle of a very tough section of Richmond, say, just not too far from here, and spent some time conversing at the level with people who have dropped out of higher ed, would it be more productive than what we're doing here? I know you ask yourselves those same questions, but I think taking higher ed on the road, and I mean that sincerely, with the right kind of people and the right kind of settings, makes a lot of sense. Because those folks are going somewhere. They're doing something. It's about value. They're not finding value in higher ed, so they're doing other things. How do we shift that value and expectation? So I think that's one of the things I'd like to hear more about, how the federal government is helping to support institutions of learning across the P21 continuum to identify ways to make that access and shift the expectation. Because money is critical. but mentoring is at least as important, and how do we do that? And secondly, on the private side, we know that in Virginia, that if we were to fill all of the seats in higher ed, private and public now, we would not meet the need in our state. You're hearing this from other states as well. How are you helping incentivize public-private partnerships within institutions so that we can be more effective working together?
So these are all great questions without easy answers, but in a country that's going to become majority-minority in the not-too-distant future, the achievement gap isn't just devastating to the Black and Latino communities, it's devastating to the country, and we have to start to look at it in a much broader context. Far too many of our children of color go to schools that don't prepare them for higher ed, so either drop out of high school, if they graduate, they're having to take remedial classes and burn through Pell Grants, so raising standards and the whole K-12 reform effort we can sort of talk about. But we've been so proud to see the country start to adopt higher standards for the first time, and this is going to take time to teach those higher standards, and schools of ed have to help us get there. But the fact that so many states historically dummied down standards and lied to children, lied to parents, I think did them a grave disservice. The second piece you talk about is the mentoring, the support. And obviously we've talked a lot about access. That's hugely important. That's obviously the starting point. The goal is not access, the goal is completion. And the truth is universities have very, very different track records there. And when I ran the Chicago public schools, 90% of my children came from the minority community, 85% lived below the poverty line. We were the achievement gap. And we saw young people with identical GPAs and test scores going to different universities, some at 80% completion rates and some at like 20 completion rates. And quite frankly, we started to steer our students towards certain universities and away from others. And so what we can do to help support universities that, yes, work on the access side, but have the mentoring, have the summer bridge programs, build cultures around completion, not just access. We want to be much more creative there. We've all done a lot, I think, to try and increase access. We still have more to do. I don't think we've done nearly enough at the federal level to incentivize completion. And that's got to be the name of the game. And so we're pushing ourselves to be more creative, to frankly start to move resources towards those places where completion rates are going up, and possibly away from those places where we don't see a serious commitment to completion at the back end.
Thank you.
It would seem that part of the solution around completion is better tracking students and the behaviors that are very different now than they were a generation ago with college attendance. So students do start at a two-year college, or they start at a university and take summer courses in a two-year college, but they are, as it's called in the Western states, swirling. They are picking up credits and courses from many different institutions. There needs to be a system, a database, if you will, and this has been a recommendation that has come out of various commissions at the state level and the federal level over time. Could you speak to the database notion and the idea of better tracking students, again, as an incentive so that they're not losing credits, so that financial aid requirements aren't disincentivizing these students to complete a credential or a degree?
Sure, I would say that you know, the good news is that the Recovery Act and certainly the department has provided funding to states to continue to improve their state data systems so they can link all of the sectors of education from early learning through post-secondary, and also link the sectors to labor so that you know, for example, after graduation or if a student drops out, and respecting all the privacy and FERPA laws, that people are progressing in general. We don't want to know individual students, but we want to know, are students moving through the systems and getting value? Are they stopping out? If so, what are the barriers? Where can we put our best efforts at the federal level? What can we do at the state level? And our approach has been to empower states to have integrated data systems that meet the needs of the states. So we have tremendous variation, as you can imagine, across 50 states. I'll shoot, you know, Florida as an example. They've already done this. They have linked their entire secondary, elementary, post-secondary, early learning, and labor data. And there are other pieces of the data sets that they're continuing to work on. So the challenge is, you know, can states have a data system? Can we then at the federal level improve our data system so we can track part-time students, transfer students? 2 out of 3 students today, very different than 50 years ago, get their education at more than one institution. So at William and Mary, they'll probably get 95% of their education here, but they may take some summer classes and so on. Other students, if they're in the community colleges and there are cutbacks, they may end up at 2 or 3 community colleges just to get that first 2 years done. So shame on us for not having a really sophisticated data center to say, from the research standpoint, this is our best bet. This is where we really want to invest to get more throughput in the student flow. And so your ideas about ways that we can really move ahead on this are most welcome.
John, you haven't had a bite.
I'd like to, if I may, introduce a different dimension into the discussion. So far, we've been talking primarily about a baccalaureate model of education, and of course, the role that we've been playing in transfer and the movement between institutions is very, very important for that. But you mentioned the workforce, you mentioned business and industry, and we know that one of the primary missions, particularly in community colleges, is, as part of our comprehensive mission, is the preparation of people who aren't going on necessarily for a baccalaureate degree, who are getting an associate degree, a certificate, a non-credit credential that allows them to immediately enter into the workforce or to advance in the workforce. We work closely with business and industry, with their incumbent workers, to upgrade their skills so they can keep up technologically with what is happening. So that's really about 50% of what we do in community colleges. And so my question for you is, what about that segment of the population? How are we supporting them and making sure that it's affordable for them to get through these programs, particularly because many of them, when they start off, are those who have the least and who are looking for something very, very tangible at the end. They want that entry, they want that job, they want that career. Now, later, many of them go on, because once they get that touch of success in higher education, they're ready for advancement. But the initial stages, it's that concrete goal of, I need that job, I need that career.
So I'll answer, then I'd love to open up to the audience for questions. But I'm more and more convinced, we have a tough economic times now, high unemployment rate, and the question I keep asking myself, do we have a jobs crisis or do we have a skills crisis? And I'm more and more convinced we have a skills crisis, not a jobs crisis. And in fact, right now with high unemployment, my numbers won't be exact, but we have over 2 million high-wage, high-skilled jobs now in this country that we can't fill because we're not producing the employees with the skills that employers are looking for. And I think we in education have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what are we doing there? I think community colleges, whether it's 18-year-olds or 38-year-olds or 58-year-olds, retraining and retooling and green energy jobs and IT jobs and healthcare jobs, community colleges are doing an amazing job of getting individuals and families back on their feet. And as that happens, I think the country is going to get back on its feet. So one thing we're trying to do to specifically support that is in partnership with the Department of Labor through the Trade Adjustment Act, TAA. We have $2 billion, $500 million last year, $500 million this year, another $1 billion to come. Lots of things we're still fighting for. We have this money to invest only in those places where there are real public-private partnerships, where what's going on at the community college is leading to real jobs in that area. And that's going to look very different in Miami and Mississippi and Minneapolis. But where there are tight partnerships, and I've seen many of those places where industry is basically guaranteeing jobs for folks coming out of these training programs. We want to continue to invest very heavily. However, I must say there are some parts of the country where these two worlds are still disconnected, where business doesn't talk to education and vice versa. And while they all want the right thing for the community, those partnerships haven't been formed. So we're trying to put huge carrots on the table, $500 million a year with labor to put behind communities to get that fundamental intersect that you're talking about.
That could really help.
Yeah. So we have some.
Well, let's have some questions. If necessary, I'll call on you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm David Buckingham from Virginia Wesleyan College, and I want to thank all the panelists, especially Secretary Duncan and Secretary Cantor. I have 2 thank yous, and I have 2 requests. The direct lending is working. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our Director of Financial Aid says it's seamless. Secondly, we sent a group to the fundamentals training workshop in Philadelphia this summer. That kudos to that. And first suggestion is that perhaps you could consider coming to us, that we, Virginia Wesleyan College, would have a regional meeting. It would be more cost-effective for us. We could go probably as far as Richmond and still drive in, so that's request number one. And number two, and perhaps the most pressing thing, is the Fafsa verification. I wish you would please canvass financial aid directors and see what can be done to make that more seamless. It has a lot of hiccups.
Yeah.
Virginia Wesleyan College.
Yeah.
You want to take this?
Yeah, I'll just say that, you know, my dream is no FAFSA for about 85% of people. 15, that's our dream, okay, that's a dream. The good news is, and kudos, may sound funny, but kudos to the Internal Revenue Service for building this partnership with the Department of Education. The secretaries have met, Secretary Duncan met with the director of the IRS, they shook hands. What we've done is you can push a button now and get your prior year taxes ported in, instead of going and finding and losing and this and that. So the idea is, you know, we do this for the Social Security Administration, and everybody in this room gets a letter from the government every spring that tells you how many quarters you worked and what your pension will be because of that. And you get an amount when you turn 66 or 70 when you decide you've had enough. And why can't we use those same principles for something like the FAFSA? So that's very much in our thinking. Will it happen soon? No. Are we working on it very hard? Yes. Can we move ahead and get the verification and use technology better? Yes, it is a partnership with other agencies like the IRS or the SSA. But we are in there really working on those kinds of things. And you'll see a lot more coming out from the partnerships we're building.
What makes it so hard to do that deed?
Because we have a lot of laws and regulations, and you are a lawyer, I am not, I'm a teacher. And we have—
I know all about laws and regulations.
We have decades of laws that have to be either changed or the secretary has regulatory authority, but we'll bump into another agency that has a whole different set of regulations.
So it's not really a lack of goodwill or interest in getting it done, it's just so complicated.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of bureaucracy.
Well, we need to issue you a magic wand then. And
Give it to him. Thank you.
No, I think you know that's the right vision we have to get to, and I think thinking through how we get there together as quickly as possible. We're thrilled on the FAFSA simplification. Thrilled we got that down to under half an hour. We tracked that very closely, but clearly we have a long way to go. The form itself used to be a huge barrier. We've removed a lot of that, but you know, with some more time, we need to get this done. And your pressure on us, pushing us, is actually very helpful. Yeah.
You know, it took, gosh, you know, 20 years to get the direct lending put in place. And that was, it seems simple now, you know, send a check from the Treasury through the school to the student, instead of from the Treasury to a lender to the school to the student. So we eliminated that step, said it couldn't be done our first year. People said this was impossible, so we did that, and we have a lot more to do.
yes.
You got a mic coming by.
Mr. Duncan, I read in the Richmond paper that you were going to be present. I was real happy to hear that. And I know Mr. Reevely and I would like to know if you have any eligibility in your basketball, because we need a center real bad.
I'm old. I think you got a better one right here. I'm old and slow. You got to do better than me.
But I understand you got a good left hook. I wanted to share a story with you so that you can take it around the country, and it's in support of Mr. Tobias's community college and Mr. Denver's college. I served 9 years on the community college board, and it was a tremendous education of how we can reach people that felt like they didn't have a chance to go to college and find a way to get into college and be successful. We worked about 6 years on the board to build a new college here, a branch of Thomas Nelson. And fortunately, my friend and probably one of the best legislators in our city is here with me, sitting at the left, Tommy Norman. Senator Norman was able to, before our opening, was able to get $2.5 million from from the state for us to put in a dental hygienist curriculum. And we built 11 chairs. We've got, I think, about 15 dummies. And the curriculum started. The line is unbelievable trying to get into it. Every one of them are being hired when they come out. We're in our 3rd year, and it's a credit to the legislative body under Tommy's, Senator Norman's direction. But there are a lot of those kind of things that happen in the community college, and a number of the students coming out are actually going on to become dentists. Yeah. And it is probably one of the greatest success stories. Also, the college, in the 9 years that I was exposed, the college has produced a number of students, and I know of the ones that have come to William & Murray, which we're very proud of, and even our president has often spoke how proud he is of the success rate of those people transferring from the community college into the 4-year academic schools. So I wanted to share that with you and also try to recruit you if you got 1 more year left.
Well, I just appreciate your collective leadership, and I don't know if you've applied or not, but again, those kinds of stories, those TA grants are directly for that kind of work. And I think, you know, people always say, what's the appropriate federal role? And we're trying to figure that out every day. I think a big part of the appropriate federal role is to take to scale what's working. And where you have a program where folks are guaranteed jobs and you have waiting lists, that's where our resources can hopefully reduce those waiting lists and get more people real jobs and taking that next step. So if you haven't applied, I'd encourage you guys to look very, very seriously at those TA grants. They are competitive. If you don't get them this year, come back in next year. But we want to take to scale what is working in communities. It sounds like a great, great public-private partnership.
We got the maximum in the first round.
Yeah, big time, big time. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm Carol Tiso. I'm a faculty member here at the School of Education. On behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to thank you for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I have a question that's sort of a philosophical question, but it's really, all the way down affects our teacher candidates and their students. And the question is, we talk so much, and we are pushed, and we talk in the federal government and state government and at the university level about the private, corporate, plus education partnerships. And we find more and more folks from corporations, from corporate backgrounds that are on our boards of trustees and those kinds of things. The first question is, are you aware of the sort of disaster that happened recently at the University of Virginia in terms of the
I missed that. What was that?
Fight between. That's the first question. I think it has to be. I wonder if we're getting pressured from both sides. We are pressured because we here at William & Mary care very much about our students and them being successful. In fact, we get calls all the time from principals all over the country, please send us your kids. We know that they're going to be great teachers. And so that's the pressure. And yet the corporate pressure to go out to get grants, to get corporate sponsorship and those kinds of things, those become a constant tug on our university, who we are as a university, and it trickles down to the students because, I hate to use trickle down, sorry. But what happens is that the students end up, in some cases, not getting the kind of attention that they need because of this pull. So I'm wondering, what is the short-term maybe and then the long-term answer to, yes, we need to be in partnerships with private industry and those kinds of things, but what are the strings that come along with that, and how then is that going to affect our students, who are the teacher candidates, and then their students?
Well, it's a great question. I don't know if I'll have a great answer to it. I am a big believer in public-private partnerships. I'm a big believer, particularly in times of constrained resources, that we have to do things differently. And that's just reality. It can be painful, it can be difficult. I've talked about what I call the new normal. And if we keep doing business the same way, we become obsolete. We become dinosaurs. And so it does take change. I think where you have a real, dental program that is leading to real jobs, that's sort of the perfect public-private partnership. I don't know what the strings are there. It doesn't seem like there are any strings. So I sort of hear your concern about what these strings are. But I think we all have to stretch ourselves. What I worry so much about in education, and business is part of it, historically we all point fingers. So private industry points fingers at higher ed and vice versa. Higher ed points fingers at high schools that kids aren't ready. High schools point fingers at elementary schools, goes down. Early childhood point fingers at parents. And ultimately, you know, we're all in this together. And so for me, it's not about pointing fingers. It's not about relitigating the past. It's about how do we collectively, right now we have a 25% dropout rate in this country, 25%. It's 1 million young people each year leaving our schools for our streets, and they are condemned to poverty and social failure. So when you hear universities going to the streets, that's music to my ears. How do we all, everybody, get that dropout rate down to 0 as fast as we can? How do we make sure folks aren't just going to college, but are graduating from college? How are we bringing in great talent like you have here in William & Mary? How do we elevate and strengthen the teaching profession so we have great people going to those underserved communities to help that next generation come up? So it's very easy to point fingers and lay blame and say it's someone else's fault. Ultimately, these are our kids, these are our families, these are our communities, and we're either going to all rise together or we're all going to fall together. And so the strings part worries me. Don't quite know what that is, but we all, I think, have to move outside our comfort zones. We have to partner with folks historically we may have been a little bit scared of before, thought they were part of the problem. And if we stay in our silos, if we stay in isolation, I think we're going to continue to really struggle.
Now, I'd just like to add to, and this is more to the academic faculty. One thing that I've seen around the country, communities that ask philanthropy to convene education and business partners around priorities can play a tremendous role in figuring out much smarter relationships than the historic relationships we've had, which are either for higher education to ask business to just invest without a return on investment, or business to complain that they're not getting the trained graduates. But really, and this is what Skills for America's Future is trying to do, really create the kind of, I would say, sustainable partnerships and relationships where business and education are coming together to really look at the kinds of pros and cons of investing this way or that way or another way. So I think a lot of work can be done in that area, and just want to, congratulate the schools that have those kinds of relationships, and do want to say that philanthropy generally around the country, community foundations and others really do want to play that role to say, how could we not just accept the new normal, but really move beyond it to create the new kinds of partnerships that are going to be sustainable. I think, academic thinks about, I've got to have a full-time person doing grants and contracts to run around the websites and figure out what's available in order to apply, and all of that infrastructure. But I've seen some very innovative ways that people are trying to think about partnering together, having consortia do the kinds of things to, I think, bring almost $20 million to Virginia for the community college grant, because they partnered at the state level, 24 million. Or the grant that you all got. I was looking at the Virginia Initiative for Science Teaching and Achievement. It's $5 million for Virginia. Kudos to all of you for partnering on that and making the infrastructure costs go way down, because you do have those relationships.
So 2 more, maybe?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and everyone for being here today. My name is Lamar Moses. I'm a doctorate student here, School of Education. And a question in regards to the disadvantage and the ability to benefit test. I know as of July 1st, that went away as a way to be admitted into schools, but often with the disadvantage, they relied on ATB testing to have those opportunities that you spoke about today, and just wanted to get an understanding of why you decided to move away from ATB. Was it maybe to push towards GED, but just trying to get an understanding of the reason why?
Yeah, actually, that was an act of Congress. They were looking to balance a budget. It was a very hard call. We hope that'll be restored. We know some members of Congress are looking at that. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was people at that level who needed the service, who were getting the service and getting into college. So we're continuing to work with members of Congress that are interested, and hopefully they'll review the decision and maybe reconsider.
Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, absolutely.
Got time for one more question.
Hello, my name is Michelle Moses. I'm a senior here at the college. I'm a history major, and I'm also at the ed school. And I'm spending my summer teaching at Breakthrough Collaborative at a site down in Norfolk. That's a program to prepare high-achieving middle school students to go to high-achieving high schools and later colleges. And I was wondering, what kind of steps do you think we can take to better prepare all of our students, and not just the few that can get into these small programs, to go to colleges or even just community colleges instead of dropping out of high school?
So again, no easy answers in any of this. I always talk about a couple things. I think a lot of young people drop out of high school not because it's too hard, but because it's too easy. I don't think we challenge young people enough and how we better engage them. So I think that's one. Again, higher standards I think is a big part of the dropout solution. And some folks think that's counterintuitive. The more you push folks, the more they'll drop out. I just fundamentally disagree with that. Secondly, I'm just a big believer in extracurriculars at the high school level, so not just the academic, but dance and drama and art and music and sports and debate and chess and yearbook and robotics. In tough economic times, those things often disappear, and you have to give kids reasons to be excited about coming to school, and it may not be, for whatever reason, biology or physics or algebra. It may be to play in the band or to be on the swimming team. And so I think keeping those extracurriculars in tough economic times are hugely important. And then at the end of the day, no one ever drops out because they want to be a high school dropout. It's always a symptom of much deeper things going on in their lives. It's not the cause. So I just go back to relationships, mentors, role models, a teacher, a counselor, a coach, somebody who's going to be with that kid. And frankly, if you're starting in high school, it's really late then. You know, you ask any kindergarten teacher, who are the 3 kids in her class? It's not the 30. It's who are the 3 kids in the class who don't have the support at home that they need? And what are we going to do as a community, nonprofits, universities, faith-based institutions, to take that 5-year-old and stay with them for the next 12 years all the way through and help them through thick and thin to make sure they get through. So those 3 things, making sure we're challenging kids academically, making sure they're engaged in the school's life beyond just the academics, and third, having at least one adult they can turn to if they don't have as much support at home. If we did those things systemically, I think we'd go a long way to getting that dropout rate from 25% to 0 much more quickly than we have.
Well, Mr. Secretary and Madam Undersecretary, Marnie and Martha, we really appreciate your being with us today. And the panel, you guys did good. And it's been really wonderful to see, as I said at the outset, so many of you all come. Obviously, we're speaking about issues that truly matter fundamentally to each of us and to the country. And while I don't think there are any easy answers, and sometimes even any obvious answers, I do think there are answers. I don't think it's hopeless by any means. But as I said at the outset, the more we can start by focusing on the world as it actually is, on the hard, cold facts, the more likely it is we'll actually come up with some steps we can take that'll work. And it's also my view that it is just so fundamentally important to figure out, even if it's just one step, a step we can actually take and make it work. Because the tendency is to be paralyzed by the enormity of the task and by the huge diversity of American higher education, which is, of course, one of its strengths, and to try to identify all the issues and all the opportunities and all the difficulties. And the end result is we end up rotating endlessly over the enormity of it all. It's so crucial. Just figure out 1 or 2 things to do in real time. Get them done. That will build self-confidence and morale and momentum, and then we can move on to something else. I mean, if, for example, the abominable financial aid form dragon could be slain in real time. Well, thank you all for being here, and in particular, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys. We gotta get that one.